Me? My hair there a little bit. Daniel Greenfield's here from Front Page Magazine. He's a columnist. He's written across the board articles, and right now he's particularly covering the coronavirus story emanating out of New York and New Jersey and Pennsylvania with regard to the this nursing home fiasco. Daniel, thanks for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's my pleasure.
Now, this on the surface looks terrible, that you could have Governor Cuomo, Andrew Cuomo of New York, in March issue an executive order basically requiring that nursing homes accept people who test positive for COVID-19. And thus you have possibly thousands of people of the most vulnerable members of our society infected and dead as a result of this terrible policy. And the same thing apparently is going on in Pennsylvania, and I believe New Jersey as well. What is this all about, and why are they doing this?
So New York and New Jersey, between them, have about 5,000 deaths in nursing homes. Both had a policy of forcing nursing homes to accept coronavirus patients. So did Governor Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan. So did Governor Newsom in California. You actually are seeing this in a number of states, including now Minnesota, where about 81% of the deaths have happened in nursing homes. About 5% of New York's nursing home population has been killed by the coronavirus. So the question is why they were doing this. And they were doing this because of lockdown culture. Now, if you recall all the flattening the curve stuff, everybody was told to stay at home, lock down, and so-called non-essential businesses were shut down. All this was done because supposedly there was going to be a massive deluge, a torrent of coronavirus patients that were going to overwhelm hospitals, and people would be dying in the hallways just like in Italy. Never mind the fact that America has far more hospital capacity than Italy does. And we've seen the massive hospital ships sent to New York, sent to California. They hardly treated any patients. So what was actually going on was that hospitals were pushing everybody out. So if you actually had a baby, you had to be out in 12 hours. It didn't matter what. Now, if you were a senior citizen and you had coronavirus and you were in the hospital, the push was to get you out. Where were they going to send you? They were going to send you to a nursing home. So the goal was to so-called free up spare hospital capacity. In fact, the capacity did not need to be freed up. Since then, Cuomo has backpedaled. He's reversed the policy. Obviously, it's too late to bring back 5,000 people who are dead. And Minnesota Governor Walz has still refused to reverse the policy. So in some states, they're still insisting on placing coronavirus patients in nursing homes. And obviously, that completely spreads the virus out of control because you've got the same staff. Even when you have a certain amount of isolation measures, the same staff are working. And even if it's not the same staff, the staff are working with the coronavirus patients, and the staff who are working with the other nursing home residents are still interacting. They're still sharing facilities.
Now, this was not the case across the board, because my own home state of Massachusetts did not do this. In Massachusetts, when a person was to be discharged from the hospital with coronavirus, if they didn't have a place to go in terms of a family that would shelter them, they were sent to these hotels that the state rents in the greater Boston area. There's one, I believe, in Revere, and there's one in Weymouth that the state sometimes uses for homeless people, and they would go there and they would be cared for by professionals. They would be isolated. They would not be exposed to the most vulnerable members of our society, the people in their 80s in nursing homes. And even in a best case scenario where they claim that they had to do this because of alleged overcrowding, the fact is that at no time was there overcrowding in any hospital, my understanding, in the United States from the coronavirus. So at best, this is a case of extreme negligence.
Yeah, there was no city where all the hospitals ran out of capacity. You had a number of individual hospitals, for example, in the Bronx that were hard hit, but it wasn't that there was no hospital space in the city altogether. And they did set up these massive facilities, whether it was the hospital tents in New York or whether it was the hospital ships, Detroit and Michigan, they set up this massive space between the coronavirus patients in the TCF center. Again, none of them actually treated more than a few dozen patients because the reality is there was never an overwhelming of capacity. When we're talking about overwhelming capacity, they were talking about overwhelming capacities for the ICUs. Now, ICUs are generally not that big because you only get so many people in. But this fantasy where you would have thousands of patients coming in and they'd be dying in the hallways, that never happened. And what happens if you run out of space in the ICU? There is still plenty of space in the hospitals, especially because they canceled pretty much everything else and pushed everybody out. So ICUs in some cases reached capacity, but that's not the end of the game.
Right, and also the original numbers that I believe were emanating out of communist China, that we would have 2 million deaths in the United States, and we would be overwhelmed. That never happened, but even if it did, we were set up. I mean, we had the hospital ships in Los Angeles and New York. We had the Javits Center in New York. Here in Boston, they took the Heinz Center and the DCU Center in Worcester, and they converted them into massive hospitals, of which nobody ever really showed up in. In Boston, we had a hospital that could have taken 2,000 people. There was never more than a couple of hundred people in there, and they were homeless people. I don't even believe they were COVID people. And I mean, that's something that needs to be investigated anyway. So it probably costs the taxpayer $100 million, probably a lot more than that. But, I'm glad that we were prepared for the worst. But what astounds me is that even in a worst case scenario where we may not have been able to have handled the overflow, the idea of putting a virus infected person in a nursing home is the equivalent of an atrocity. I mean, it's criminal in my way of thinking.
It absolutely is criminal. And the worst case scenario that actually happened, the fantasies that they were spinning of mass deaths among the general population never happened because, again, the people who are most vulnerable to this are over 70, over 80. They're people with breathing problems. The media makes a great deal out of the story of the young man who dies of this or who suffers a great deal of this, but this is an aberration, and you get this with any kind of illness. You get this with the flu. The death toll has been concentrated on the people who are over 80. Those are the people who needed to be protected. Instead, they shut down everybody. They confined everybody to their homes. They confined a healthy population to their homes, which absolutely did not need to be done. Instead, meanwhile, they actually introduced it into the most vulnerable populations by sending coronavirus patients to nursing facilities. And again, there are some places in Minnesota that are still continuing to do this. This is an absolutely murderous, horrifying policy, and yet it's the basis for this broken model where the hospitals are going to be overwhelmed. The hospitals are not overwhelmed. They're still continuing to do this. The nursing homes was where the crisis was always going to be. I mean, even if we're looking at the numbers from China, again, the elderly population, the people who have severe breathing problems, the people who are on ventilators, those are always the people who are going to be the people who are on oxygen. Those are always going to be the high-risk population. They should have been protected. We spent trillions of dollars wrecking the economy, yet we actually failed to spend millions of dollars protecting the most vulnerable populations. And just another addendum, the worst outbreaks of this have been in state-run facilities. They're focusing on nursing home operators. Yes, plenty of nursing homes are badly run, but the 3 worst outbreaks in the country, the majority of them took place in nursing homes. 2 out of 3 veterans nursing homes in New Jersey that are state-run had the worst outbreaks, and in Massachusetts had one of the worst outbreaks in the state-run veteran facility.
Now, I think that what is the percentage of people who have died of the virus that are over 80 or that were in nursing homes?
So the numbers keep changing all the time and they're not being properly reported. But at this point, the vast majority of the people who have died are over 80. And that's just really always going to be the case because the virus fundamentally hits the respiratory system. People who have weaker respiratory systems are going to die of it. And in particular, people who have comorbidities, people who already have various medical problems going on, which is why sometimes there's this debate about what are we putting down on the death certificate. Well, yes, people who are hit by a virus may actually end up dying of heart failure, which is not uncommon, or people who actually might have lived if they hadn't had other comorbidities. The virus comes in, it knocks them for a loop, and it actually ends up contributing to their death. So it's hard to know, but the death rates in nursing homes have been completely out of whack. You have, for example, 100 people dying in a single facility in a month. That's not normal.
And meanwhile, today, as of today, I mean, I was certainly listening to MSNBC and CNN and, the other Mockingbird media outlets. The governors of New York and New Jersey are very craftily blaming President Trump for the nursing home fiasco. It's almost like talking points. They're saying, well, we didn't have enough PPP at the nursing homes, which, by the way, was untrue mostly, and that Trump is responsible for that, and that if Trump had done more federal something or other, more federal coordination, they're really trying to pass the buck. How are they trying to pull that off? And do you think they're going to be successful at that?
It's absolutely shameless. Governor Cuomo previously, when he was asked about PPE at nursing homes, said that's not our job, but somehow it's President Trump's job to supply PPE to nursing homes. The bottom line is whether nursing homes had enough PPE or not, don't send coronavirus patients into nursing homes. The one who actually introduced the virus into the nursing homes, President Trump did not do that. The CMS guidelines, the federal guidelines, did allow for it, but Cuomo, Murphy, and other governors actually mandated it. There's a huge difference between allowing it and mandating. It should not have been allowed, but the people who mandated it were the ones who actually signed the death warrants. And that's Cuomo, that's Murphy, it's Newsom, it's Whitmer, it's a whole lot of these Democrat governors.
And all the blue state governors, and these same governors are the ones who are cracking the whip on average Americans if they do something like, it's become, they're so arbitrary and so drunk with power. In New York, if you walk on the wet part of the beach, you're okay, but if you walk on the dry sand, you're going to get fined. They're going to pull you out of the water if you go into the water, de Blasio tells us. In Michigan, you can go to the supermarket and buy beer and lottery tickets, but you can't buy garden seeds. It's crazy, and it's really showing, I think, in a very stark way, the difference between these left-wing, almost dictatorial, Mussolini-like governors, and the more patriotic red state governors who are trying to reopen their states in a way that's responsible and that helps people stay safe, and that in a way that protects the people who are the most vulnerable. And it's become a political football. It's really breaking down, not just in terms of the states, but in terms of people left and right, in that the people on the left and the governors and their authoritarian governors, they'd like to keep this thing running all the way as long as they can. They want to shut everything down. It's like they're drunk with the power of this. I think that Eric Trump had it absolutely right. They'll run it right up to the election, and then the next day they'll drop it. Whereas the more patriotic governors, the red state governors, and more average Americans, including probably a lot of liberals, want to get back to work, want to realize that we are responsible for our health, we should take precautions, but yet at the same time we got to start functioning again. You got to go outside again. How do you see the politics of this manifesting, and where do you think it's going to take us?
You're absolutely right that it is a power grab. It's a quite crazy power grab, and people have not been questioning some of this. You have politicians who began defining who is essential, who is non-essential, who can work and who can't. And, one of the odder things is they define the media as essential. Is CNN really essential? Well, the politicians who want CNN to cover them decided that it's essential. 10% of CNN staff are actually working, even though any number of CNN people have actually you have 3 CNN anchors who have come down with the coronavirus.
Right.
Yet CNN is deemed essential. At the same time, people who are performing basic essential businesses are not allowed to work, because you have the politicians who decide that they are essential. They decide that the media is essential. They decide that they can decide which part of the country is essential and which part isn't. And of course, they're demanding massive national bailouts to cover this whole disaster, and they're going to blame President Trump if they don't get it. So this is very much a political ploy. It's also a massive power grab. For example, a number of religious freedom organizations are stepping forward and asking, why are churches, why are synagogues at the back of the line when reopening, when you can actually open tattoo parlors and hair salons in some cases?
And abortion
so the bottom
clinics.
line is this is political.
Yeah, and I think that the politics of this, I believe, and I have no way to prove this. I don't have any evidence at all. But I think it's going to backfire in a big way on the liberals. I think it could set them back a generation as we approach the election, because I think that as the red states do open up and they get back to normal and people start to make money again and start to go out, they're gonna contrast that with these authoritarian dictators who are trying to hold everything back, and people are going to get pretty PO'd. Now, obviously, the hard left isn't going to change. We get that. But that sort of vast middle where you have liberals who are don't like Trump and they don't, they tend to vote Democratic, but yet they have an inkling of interest in getting back to work, they're going to wake up, or at least a good percentage of them will wake up. We could shave off enough of them that we could possibly take back the House and certainly reelect President Trump. I noticed that in this special election in California, Garcia won a congressional district that includes parts of Los Angeles, a district that voted for Hillary Clinton with over 7 percentage points, and he won it handily. I don't know if that's a harbinger. I don't know if that's the the kind of the light at the beginning of a wave, but it is the Democrats actually only have 15 congressmen, representatives to hold on to the House. I think it could happen. I think that they could be vulnerable. What do you think?
Also, just anecdotally, I'm seeing social distancing pretty much collapsing in California. Newsom has been pushed to reopen ahead of his former schedule just because people want to go to the beach. They want to go out. They're getting sick of this. And there's a kind of sharp division between the people who are outside wearing masks and scowling at everyone and the people who are just going outside and having fun because it's warm, it's summery. So the media is really obsessively trying to frighten everybody, trying to keep everybody in a state of permanent panic. They try to create new crises, but even their conspiracy theories at this point, they're reduced to claiming that the numbers out of Georgia are not legitimate, that there's a conspiracy to cover up the numbers, that the numbers are actually worse than they are. Then they're claiming there's a conspiracy at the CDC to cover up the real numbers, and they try to do the same thing to Florida. They brought out this woman they claimed was a data scientist, who in fact just a woman who entered numbers into a dashboard, and she'd been arrested for cyber stalking, and that's actually the reason she was in trouble. And they brought it out and claimed that this Governor DeSantis is suppressing her. They're suppressing the real numbers. So the media is really starting to depend on these conspiracy theories because they don't have the actual coronavirus numbers. A lot of the damage has been done in the nursing homes. That was really catastrophic. But really, a lot of the dying has happened already. It's only going to go so far, and the media understands this, and people are now starting to wake up. They're saying, look at what happened to my grandfather, look what happened to my grandmother. They're demanding answers, and the media does not have those answers for them. All the media can do is try to rip up more panics, but people can't sustain this anymore. People can't stay locked up for months and months indefinitely, which means they're going to have to pivot, and they're going to have to pivot long before the election gets here.
And by the way, the numbers, you could go to the CDC website, and they actually have the real numbers, and they're a lot lower than what the media is reporting. I don't know why that is. The media is reporting 80, 85, 90,000. The CDC website says more like 50. So, this is not some conspiracy theory. There it is. Now, Daniel, I want to ask you about something. I don't know if you know anything about this, but I feel incumbent on asking you this question. What the hell has happened to the Drudge Report? What is? Have they gone off the deep end? I mean, that's not the same Drudge Report that I've looked to, before. I mean, first of all, they were totally in the bag with this Ukrainian hoax in a big way. I mean, I was ready to have a heart attack reading it every day. The headlines, I mean, oh my God! And now with the coronavirus, they just ran a headline, 2 million dead by the end of summer. That could have been written by the communist Chinese. I mean, do you know what's going on over there? Do you have any insight on who's running the show in that place right now?
Frankly, the Drudge Report was always garbage. Matt Drudge was never a conservative. What he was good at doing was pandering to particular audiences. He decided to pander to another audience. Now, the Drudge Report was never reliable. What it was good at was pushing these trending things out, and that's still what he's doing. He just decided that Trump supporters are not his demographic anymore. I know he made the economic decision to do that. He's probably right because Twitter, social media has upended a lot of his business model. So he's doing what works for him, what gets him paid, what gets him in his gated mansion. And that's capitalism. We never should have thought that Matt Drudge was a conservative or that he was a common sense guy or that he was on our side. We've had this a lot over the years, particularly around the Trump era, with people who were in it for the money and they decided they have a better business model now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's about it. Although, I mean, I never thought of him as a conservative, but at least you could get some, alternative views on things. He would run articles. Oftentimes, for some reason, the British newspapers can be more honest than Americans to cover stories here. But now you get nothing but it's New York Times. I mean, it's all liberal crap. I mean, it's become something. It's completely shifted over. I mean, is that his demographic now? And what does that say about the demographic?
Well, you look at the business model of the media in general, it's been huge. The coronavirus has been huge for the New York Times. It's been huge for CNN. CNN, I believe, more than doubled its audience. New York Times picked up about 1 million more digital subscribers. You look across the board at the media, they're doing very well. So Drudge understands what he's doing. You focus on this demographic, the one that's very afraid of the coronavirus, the one that doesn't like Trump, and you can make money doing that. Because really the audience for that kind of thing is very narrow. Conservatives are going elsewhere anyway, so he's following the trend.
And it's very unscrupulous because you have essentially panic porn. I don't mean to be blunt, but, right? I mean, you've got people now, and I know a few people like this. In fact, a couple are pretty close to me, who are just afraid to go out. They're shuttered away. When they get groceries, they're ready to have a nervous breakdown. They bring it back to the house. They're scrubbing every single item. They're like dipping oranges in alcohol. I mean, it's crazy. And they're washing and running, and I mean, it's
even though the latest information is that it actually does not really pass along surfaces, despite all the alarmism.
Everyone's becoming a germaphobe. And it's in a sense, I've now heard reports, and I'm by no means a doctor, but that this sheltering for healthy people is actually damaging our immune system. First of all, we're not getting enough vitamin D because we're inside too much, and that particularly affects those of us in the northern part of the country, like I am in Boston. And we're going to weaken our immune system so that by the time the fall comes around and we get new flus and colds, we're going to be more vulnerable to these diseases, I mean, in general. And the best, in a sense, remedy is to go out and be exposed to a certain extent, not to the coronavirus. I'm not, God, this is a terrible disease. I'm not suggesting that anyone pick this up. But, in the normal course of interacting with people, you develop normal immunities to all sorts of things, and you build strength, for people who are healthy. Now, if you're not healthy and if you're obese or if you're elderly, stay sheltered. If anything, we should shelter you more because, yes, it is a deadly disease. But I'm talking here about able-bodied, healthy people. We should be out and about. We should forget this whole thing. I mean, I'm not here to suggest anything. I'm not telling anyone to do anything. I'm just expressing opinions that I've heard doctors say.
So you mentioned vitamin D. That's an important point. We're still trying to figure out why the virus seems to hit some minority groups more than others, particularly African Americans, particularly people from the Middle East. But it is very clearly the case. It's not just a matter of contextual environmental things. It seems like they're much more likely to get it harder and to die of it. One theory is that it actually is a vitamin D issue, which means that actually getting vitamin D is really important.
Yes, and this is you can look this up on Google and any medical journal that people, if you have a darker skin tone, you're going to get less natural vitamin D, and
exactly.
And so, my suggestion to African Americans, my fellow African American citizens, is just take a little vitamin D. You can get it over the counter at any drugstore, or it's part of any multivitamin. It's no big deal. Make sure you have vitamin D every day, and you're gonna improve your likelihood of not catching this virus by a huge percentage. At least, again, that's anecdotal, but it's generally something that's out there and that's been reported on by many people who know what they're talking about.
Yeah, it's definitely important, and it's kind of useful advice you're really not getting. We're getting a lot of what you call panic porn, fear porn. You're not really getting useful advice, things that you can do. It's just stay at home, cower under the bed, don't leave your home, shelter in place. We're all in this together, instead of actually telling people what they can usefully do.
Daniel, I want to just touch on one other subject before I let you go here, because I know you've done a lot of very good research, and it's a complicated subject that I want to try to break down into simple terms, and that is Obamagate and the Michael Flynn unmasking. And can you give me a very simple chronology of what we have found out recently by releases of previously classified information by Ambassador Grinnell? and what we now know about meetings that took place to try to set up a basically not an outright coup d'etat against President Trump, but a way to hobble his ability to function in office. Who knew about it? What happened? And when did they know?
So the latest significant development is the declassification of the Susan Rice email. Now, that email was particularly interesting because we'd gotten pieces of it, because it claimed to really describe Obama's briefing right before he left office on the subject of this whole investigation. Now, people were wondering, why does this email exist? Why do we need this email jotting this down and saying that President Obama said to do everything by the book? It was a strange sort of email for Susan Rice to send to herself. Now, Susan Rice has admitted that she wrote that email at the behest of White House counsel, which basically means that this email actually means the opposite of what it says. When the White House counsel tells you to jot something down in memorandum, you're trying to cover something up. So what we know is this is the exact opposite of what we were told. We know that the entire so-called investigation of Flynn, General Flynn, other Trump associates, was very much bypassed the Justice Department. It was actually, if you consider really the entire tangled web here, we don't have time to go into all of that, but you're talking about something that started with opposition research that made its jump over to the Justice Department, that then made its jump once again into the so-called intelligence community, that made its jump into White House advisors. Now, we know that White House advisors, those are the people who are, in theory, they're not in the law enforcement pathway. They were very closely monitoring the investigation. At that point, Comey was basically reporting to them. He was reporting to President Obama. He was not actually talking to the Justice Department. Acting Attorney General Sally Yates, who did deserve to be fired. Nonetheless, I think it was very credible when she said that she had no idea what was going on when Comey was briefing Obama about the whole Flynn investigation. Now, the role of Susan Rice, of course, in all this is really interesting because if you understand what was going on, this was not a criminal investigation. This was a so-called counterintelligence investigation. Now, the thing about a counterintelligence investigation is it basically has few real limits. The point is not actually to indict somebody, which means in theory these criminal defendants have absolutely no defense. So what they actually got Flynn on was a perjury trap, a very calculated perjury trap, rather than the so-called investigation that was in the way. And this is what we've seen throughout it. Really, the Mueller investigation was hoping to target President Trump with a perjury trap. They knew their actual so-called investigation would not produce anything. They knew that everything they had was absolute garbage. That was also why the Steele dossier was being kept buried and being kept in the basement. And when BuzzFeed actually did publish the Steele dossier and revealed that it was all just a bunch of nonsense and the ravings of a diseased mind, the media was very upset because they actually had exposed the fact that the basis for this entire thing was utter garbage. Anyway, getting back to the latest developments, Rice and Flynn, so they had to document that they did everything by the book, which tells you that they were not doing everything by the book. Now, the sheer scope of this goes way beyond Flynn. It goes even before Trump. We know that the Obama administration was spying on members of Congress. It was spying, for that matter, in pro-Israel groups. Going back years, we don't know how many years, and that is really the big picture because what we know already, the Flynn stuff, that's Watergate. That's already Watergate times 1,000. The full scope of this would be Watergate times millions. The bottom line is the Obama administration was using the NSA to eavesdrop on its political opponents. It did this under the guise that it was any kind of foreign entanglement there of any kind. So if Prime Minister Netanyahu would call members of Congress to discuss the Iran deal with them, that justified spying on members of Congress. We know they did this. They admitted to doing this. The media has been utterly uninterested in the fact that they did this. If the Bush administration, if the Trump administration had eavesdropped on members of Congress speaking to an ally, all hell would have broken loose. I mean considering what they did.
This is what the Watergate scandal was all about. There's a couple of bugs on phones and wiretaps. And, Obama, I recall this. He was like a control freak. He was spying on everybody, including allies. Angela Merkel, he was listening in on conversations. She was so angry that she brought it up to the UN. She wanted to have him sanctioned. It's, he was completely out of control in terms of using the apparatus of the surveillance state to spy on just about anybody he wanted to. And, it seems pretty obvious at this point, given this recent release of information, that he continued in some of these habits even after he was out of office, almost acting like a shadow president. He would show up in countries after President Trump was there, meeting people. We know that John Kerry was meeting with Iranians. I mean, in a sense, a serious violation of law, possibly. And it's almost like telling the Iranians, "Oh, Trump will be gone soon." How did he know that? It's something that liberal, Democrat, Republican, or otherwise, American people need to understand this because we cannot let this happen. I recall, lots of left wingers over the years railing against, the FBI and the CIA and the big state, and here they are now. They're silent. They won't come on with me now. I mean, it's they don't want to talk about it now. Where are you? What the hell is going on? This is everything they predicted. This is J. Edgar Hoover times 100. I mean, this is dirty laundry kept on people, spying on people, gathering for blackmail or for whatever reason, and really using the worst elements of state power to hurt people, harass people. I mean, of course, under the Mueller regime with those brown shirts, I mean, it was a very unpleasant experience to see, Roger Stone, an 80-year-old man dragged out of his bed at 3 o'clock in the morning. He's never heard of a fly, had no record. Where you have, 18 people show up with SWAT equipment, dressed with ninja, shields, breaking his wall down, and CNN outside filming the whole thing. And the left applauds this. Oh, it's wonderful. And then they want to put him in prison for 9 years. And the fact that, the Attorney General stepped in, oh, that's a terrible miscarriage of justice. These people have gone out of their friggin' minds. They're out of their minds.
So the important thing to remember about radicals is the thing they accuse you of are the things that they want to do themselves and the things that they're going to do themselves. They love the idea of a surveillance state. They just want it to be under control. And they're convinced that when it's not under their control, that it's spying on them. The things that radicals always accuse the right of are the things that they're doing or that they want to do. That's just a really hard and firm rule. They complained so much about censorship of free speech. There was no censorship of their speech. But the moment they actually gained that kind of power, the institutional power that allowed them to do that, they were censoring speech like crazy. These are the same guys with the so-called free speech movement back in the day. When they took over colleges, what was the first thing they did? They eliminated free speech. That's the way it goes across the board.
Anyway, Daniel Greenfield's my guest. Daniel Greenfield, a Shillman Journalism Fellow at the Freedom Center, which is, by the way, an excellent website. Check it out, frontpagemag.com, is an investigative journalist and writer focusing on the radical left and Islamic terrorism. Daniel, what are you working on right now?
Well, my latest piece actually explores other aspects of the coronavirus, particularly the media's financial incentive in keeping the panic going and how the media is doing such big business right now.
All right, Daniel, listen, I want to thank you for joining me as always. Let's stay in touch, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Thanks for the work you're doing.
All right. And I'll send you a link to the YouTube once it's up, Daniel. Thank you.
Great. Awesome. I'll promote it. Thanks again. Have a great